Beneath the gentle drizzle of New York City, neon lights shimmer on slick, rain-soaked streets as a man steps into a modest diner, his hand gently guiding his disabled daughter. Ethan Hayes, a single-dad millionaire who once dominated the financial world with multi-million-dollar deals, now carries a secret too heavy to share. His gaze, sharp yet scarred with pain, locks onto Emma Reed, a waitress whose warm smile masks a haunting past. Can a single-dad millionaire hide the truth forever, or will a fleeting moment change everything? As Emma touches the heart of little Sophie, a tale woven with mystery and love unfolds. Follow our channel, Millionaire Stories Best, to dive into this romantic journey where the deepest secrets will be unveiled. Ethan Hayes stepped into a small diner on the outskirts of New York, gently pushing the wheelchair of his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. A single-dad millionaire, he was accustomed to luxurious boardrooms where multi-million-dollar deals were sealed. But tonight, he sought only a quiet refuge for Sophie. The little girl, her pale blonde hair tied with a pink ribbon, sat silently, her vacant eyes unresponsive to the world around her. Schwarz. Since her mother's death 3 years ago, Sophie had barely communicated, and each day, Ethan felt a crushing helplessness tighten around his chest. He chose a secluded table in the corner, away from curious stares. The menu lay before him, but he didn't read it. His gaze remained fixed on Sophie, searching for even a flicker of hope in her delicate face. The diner radiated warmth, the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee filling the air. A young waitress, Emma Reed, approached, a small notepad in hand. Her smile was gentle, but her hazel eyes betrayed a quiet exhaustion, as if she carried an unseen burden. She asked Ethan what he'd like to order, her voice soft and unhurried. He requested grilled chicken for himself and a bowl of soft soup for Sophie, his tone steady yet firm. Emma glanced at Sophie, her brows faintly knitting with genuine concern. She suggested homemade chicken noodle soup, and when Ethan nodded, she smiled and walked away. Ethan scrolled through his phone, but his mind was elsewhere. Would Sophie eat, or would she push the spoon away as always? Minutes later, Emma returned, placing the soup before Sophie and the chicken before Ethan. She spoke briefly, her voice still warm, then stepped away. Ethan sighed, picking up the spoon, bracing for the familiar struggle. He scooped a bit of soup, bringing it close to Sophie's lips, whispering softly, "Come on, sweetheart, just a little try." But before the spoon reached her, Sophie's hand jerked, knocking it aside. Soup splattered on the tablecloth, the metallic clink of the spoon against the bowl echoing sharply. A few patrons glanced over, but Ethan barely noticed. He clenched his jaw, not out of anger at Sophie, but from the despair clawing at his heart. He was a millionaire dad commanding an empire, yet he couldn't get his daughter to eat. He tried again, his voice softer. "Sophie, please." But she only gripped her dress tightly, her eyes lost in a void. Ethan rubbed his face, struggling to stay composed. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Emma return. She knelt beside Sophie, her expression unreadable. "May I try?" she asked, her voice gentle but resolute. Ethan hesitated. He had hired the best specialists, yet none had reached Sophie. Still, the sincerity in Emma's eyes prompted him to nod, handing her the spoon. Emma didn't rush. She met Sophie's gaze, smiling as if speaking to an old friend. "Hi, Sophie," she said, her voice warm like an embrace. "My mom used to say soup is like a hug for your tummy. Wanna try?" She scooped a bit of soup, raising it without forcing. Ethan watched, his heart pounding. Sophie didn't respond, but her fingers twitched faintly, a subtle motion, almost imperceptible. Emma pressed on, undeterred. She shared a brief tale of her mother's soup-making days, her voice steady and captivating. Then, a miracle unfolded. Sophie lifted her head, her eyes meeting Emma's, not passing through her as they always did. Emma brought the spoon to Sophie's lips, and this time, the girl didn't resist. A single sip, just one, but the warm soup touched her lips and Sophie swallowed. Ethan held his breath, scarcely believing his eyes. One sip of soup was a triumph for Sophie, but what stopped his heart was her smile. A faint but unmistakable smile directed at Emma. The world seemed to tilt. Sophie hadn't smiled since her mother's passing. He looked at Emma, still kneeling beside Sophie, her eyes radiating kindness and something deeper, elusive. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emma glanced up, offering a soft smile. "I just talked to her," she replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. But Ethan knew it wasn't. A single-dad millionaire, he was adept at reading people, and he sensed a secret in Emma. Her eyes, though warm, concealed an untold story. Who was she? Why could a waitress in a humble diner touch Sophie's heart, a place even he couldn't reach? Ethan felt an inexplicable pull, not just for her skill, but for how she made him believe hope still existed. That night, as he left the diner, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Emma. He brought Sophie back to their sprawling mansion, tucking her in, but the image of Emma kneeling by his daughter haunted him. She had achieved what experts with their degrees and experience could not. As Sophie slept, Ethan sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, his mind racing. He called his assistant, his voice firm. "Find out everything about Emma Reed." He didn't know what he was searching for, but the instincts of a millionaire dad told him Emma was more than a waitress. She was hiding something, and Ethan was determined to uncover it. Gazing out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance, a small piece of paper slipped from his coat pocket. It was the diner's receipt, but in the corner, scrawled in blue ink, were Emma's words. "Thank you for trusting me, Emma." Ethan clutched the paper, his heart racing. Those words, simple yet profound, made him wonder if Emma was leaving a clue or merely offering a kind gesture. Ethan Hayes stood in the expansive study of his mansion on the outskirts of New York. Golden afternoon light streaming through the windows, casting warm glows on dark wooden bookshelves. A single dad millionaire, he was no stranger to opulence, but today his mind lingered far from numbers or contracts. The image of Emma Reed kneeling beside Sophie, coaxing a smile from her, haunted him. Sophie, his 6-year-old disabled daughter, hadn't smiled since her mother's death. Emma, a humble waitress, had achieved what costly therapists could not. Ethan knew he needed her, not just for Sophie, but for a feeling he wasn't yet ready to name. The next morning, Ethan returned to the diner, where Emma was wiping tables, her sleeves rolled up, a streak of flour dusting her arm. He approached her directly, his gaze resolute, yet gentle. He offered her a job as Sophie's caregiver, just for a week, as a trial. Emma froze, her hazel eyes flickering with hesitation. She shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not the right person." Ethan didn't back down. He spoke of Sophie's smile, of how she looked at Emma like a friend. Something in his voice, the rare sincerity of a millionaire dad, made Emma waver. She agreed, but only for a week, her eyes betraying that she was running from something. On her first day at the mansion, Emma entered Sophie's room, her heart pounding. The space brimmed with soft pastel colors, shelves lined with stuffed animals, but Sophie sat silently in her wheelchair, her gaze lost. Emma knelt down, smiled, and began reading a picture book, her voice as gentle as a breeze. Sophie didn't respond, but Emma didn't falter. She told stories, sang simple melodies, and slowly, Sophie's fingers twitched, as if following the rhythm. Ethan, watching from the doorway, stood in silence. He saw Sophie tilt her head, a small but profound gesture. His heart warmed, not just for Sophie, but for Emma, the woman bringing light back to his cold, empty home. In the days that followed, Emma and Sophie grew closer. Emma taught Sophie to draw with colored pencils, patiently guiding her trembling hand. One afternoon, when Sophie sketched a lopsided flower, she looked at Emma and gave a faint smile. Ethan, reviewing documents nearby, looked up, his heart racing. He began to join them, sitting beside Sophie, helping her stack wooden blocks under Emma's guidance. For the first time in years, he laughed. Not the polished smile of a single dad CEO, but a genuine, heartfelt laugh. Emma glanced at him, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met, carrying a spark of unspoken emotion. Yet Emma kept her distance. When Ethan asked about her life, her answers were brief, redirecting the conversation to Sophie. One afternoon, as she read a story, Ethan noticed her clutching an old bracelet, her gaze distant. He wanted to ask, but her guarded nature stopped him. She was a puzzle, and Ethan, with the instincts of a millionaire dad, sensed she hid a secret far greater than he imagined. One evening, as Emma prepared to leave, she bent to tie her shoe, and an old, crumpled letter slipped from her coat pocket. Ethan picked it up before she could react. The letter had no address, just a few handwritten lines, but it was enough to make Emma flinch. "It's not important," she said quickly, her voice trembling with regret, snatching it back. Ethan didn't press, but her eyes, chaotic, fearful, burned into his memory. What was that letter? Why did it unravel Emma, who remained so composed with Sophie? In the afternoons that followed, Ethan grew more observant. He noticed Emma checking her phone furtively, her expression anxious when she thought no one was watching. He wanted to trust her, But his instincts warned that Emma was more than a waitress. She had studied special education, he'd learned, but why had she dropped out? Why did she choose to hide in a small diner? Each time he tried to talk, Emma deflected, her smile a shield. Still, their closeness deepened. One night, as Sophie drifted off while Emma sang a lullaby, Ethan invited her to stay for tea. They sat in the living room, the golden glow of the fireplace warming the space. Emma shared stories of her childhood, but when Ethan asked about her family, she fell silent, gripping her teacup tightly. He didn't push, but his attraction to her grew stronger. She wasn't just Sophie's caregiver, she was the one making him want to open his heart again, though it had been sealed shut for years. Ethan began to change. He spent less time at the office, joining Sophie's sessions more often. He learned patience, how to hold Sophie's hand as she reached for a toy. Emma guided him, her voice soft but steady, and he realized he wasn't just learning about Sophie, but about himself. He, a single dad millionaire, once believed money could solve anything, but Emma taught him that love demanded time and presence. Yet the old letter haunted Ethan. He kept the diner receipt with Emma's note as a clue. One night, after she left, he called his assistant, his voice low but firm. "Dig deeper into Emma Reed. I need to know what she's hiding." He didn't want to doubt her, but the truth about Emma, and that letter, might hold the key to why she kept her distance. Even when her eyes revealed she felt the spark between them. Ethan Hayes stood before the small diner on the outskirts of New York, its dim lights casting a soft glow, easing the darkness of closing hour. A single dad millionaire, he rarely returned to a place twice, but Emma Reed had shattered his routine. With her gentle touch, she had reached the heart of Sophie, his disabled daughter, becoming an indispensable part of their lives. Yet last night's cryptic message, "Ask Emma about Caleb," weighed heavily on his heart. Who was Caleb? And why did that name stir unease within him? Ethan stepped inside, determined to find answers, unprepared for what lay ahead. Inside, Emma was wiping the counter, her hair loosely tied, a few strands falling across her forehead. She looked up, her familiar smile appearing, but her eyes flickered with unease upon seeing Ethan. The diner was nearly empty, save for one customer in the corner, a middle-aged man in a dark coat, his piercing gaze fixed on Emma. Ethan noticed the tension in her movements, as if she were trying to evade that stare. He sat at the counter, striving to keep his voice calm, but a storm of doubt raged within. He asked about Sophie, about her progress, but the real question burned inside him. What was Emma hiding? Their conversation began lightly. Emma spoke of an afternoon with Sophie, how the girl had started reaching for crayons without trembling. Ethan nodded, but his eyes never left her. He mentioned the old letter that had fallen from her pocket the day before, his voice gentle but pointed. Emma froze, her hand pausing on the counter, her hazel eyes flashing with caution. "Just an old keepsake," she said, her voice soft but trembling with regret. Ethan didn't believe her. A millionaire dad who built an empire by reading people, he knew she was lying. He shifted tactics, asking about her past, why she worked in a small diner instead of a place worthy of her talent. Emma deflected, steering the topic back to Sophie, but Ethan pressed on. He brought up what his assistant had uncovered. She had studied special education at NYU, topping her class, but dropped out 2 years ago. No degree, no explanation, just vanished. Emma gripped the rag tightly, her knuckles whitening. She didn't deny it, but her eyes seemed to plead for escape. Ethan leaned closer, his voice lower, almost pleading. "Emma, I need to know. For Sophie. For me." She remained silent, her breathing heavy, as if each word he spoke cut like a knife. Finally she spoke, her voice breaking. "I had a brother, Caleb. He's gone." Her words sliced through the air like a blade. Ethan held his breath, the pain in her voice piercing him. He wanted to ask more, but Emma shook her head, tears glistening but not falling. "Please, don't ask any more," she whispered, her tone desperate. She turned away, resuming her cleaning, but her hands trembled. Ethan watched her, his heart aching and confused. Who was Caleb? Why did that name shatter Emma, who was always so strong for Sophie? The air in the diner grew stifling. The man in the corner stood, walking past the counter. As he passed Emma, he paused, his cold gaze locking onto her. Emma lowered her head as if wishing to vanish. He said nothing, leaving a bill on the counter and exiting. Ethan observed, his instincts as a single dad CEO screaming that this man was no random customer. He asked Emma about him, but she shook her head, her voice firm. "Just a regular." But her eyes, panicked, evasive, told a different story. Ethan didn't push further, but his suspicions grew. He thought of Sophie, of the smile she gave Emma, and how Emma had transformed their lives. But if she was running from something, a past, a secret, could he trust her with Sophie? He stood, leaving money and a brief goodbye. As he stepped outside, he glanced back, seeing Emma behind the counter, her gaze lost, her hand clutching her old bracelet. She looked small, fragile, and for the first time, Ethan felt fear, not of her secret, but because he was starting to care for her too deeply. On the drive home, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Emma. He called his assistant, his voice icy. "Find out about Caleb and the man at the diner tonight." He needed the truth, not just to protect Sophie, but because a part of him yearned to understand Emma. She wasn't just a caregiver, she was the one thawing his heart, frozen for so long. But if she hid a dangerous secret, could he risk drawing closer? That night, in his study, Ethan opened his laptop, reviewing his assistant's report. One line stopped him cold. Caleb Lane, Emma's brother, died 2 years ago, cause unclear. No details, just a brief obituary. Ethan clenched his fist, unease rising. He looked at the diner receipt, Emma's note scrawled across it. "Thank you for trusting me." But now, that trust wavered. Emma hadn't just lost her brother, she was fleeing something bigger, and the mysterious man might hold the key. As he prepared to shut down, his phone buzzed. An anonymous message. "Ask Emma about the lawsuit." His heart pounded. A lawsuit? What did it have to do with Caleb, Emma, and the stranger's chilling stare? Ethan gazed out the window, the darkness outside swallowing all answers. He knew he was inching closer to the truth, but each step made him fear losing Emma and himself. Ethan Hayes sat in the opulent office of his mansion on the outskirts of New York, the late night silent, with only the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his tense face. A single dad millionaire, he was accustomed to making cold, calculated decisions, but now his heart churned with turmoil over Emma Reed. The woman whose gentle touch had reached Sophie was becoming a mystery he couldn't ignore. The message about a lawsuit and the name Caleb haunted him. Papers piled high on his desk, yet answers remained elusive. Ethan clutched the diner receipt with Emma's scrawled note, "Thank you for trusting me," and wondered if that trust was a mistake. The next morning, Emma arrived at the mansion, her eyes weary but still soft as she entered Sophie's room. The little girl, usually brightening at Emma's presence, sat silently today, her gaze lost. Emma knelt down, smiling, reading a story, but Sophie didn't respond. Ethan, watching from the doorway, felt his chest tighten. He needed Emma, not just for Sophie, but because she had brought hope to their small family. Yet the secrets she hid, Caleb, the lawsuit, the strange man, couldn't be ignored. He resolved to confront her, but not yet. He needed more information. At noon, Mark, Ethan's best friend and business partner, arrived at the office. Mark, with his easy smile but sharp eyes, was someone Ethan always trusted. They discussed work, but Ethan quickly shifted topics. He spoke of Emma, her miraculous effect on Sophie, and the odd clues, the letter, the message, the man at the diner. Mark frowned, flipping through a file from his briefcase. "I looked into Emma Reed, as you asked," he said, his voice low. "She's not as simple as you think." Ethan stiffened, his heart racing. Mark revealed that Emma had been an outstanding student at NYU, studying special education, but 2 years ago she dropped out after a lawsuit. The suit involved the death of her brother, Caleb Lane, a boy with severe medical issues. No public details emerged, but the family had sued NYU and several individuals, including Emma, for negligent care. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the ground crumble beneath him. Emma, whom he trusted with Sophie, was tied to such a tragedy. Mark looked at him, his tone grave. "She might be running, Ethan. You need to be careful." That evening, Ethan waited for Emma in the living room after Sophie slept. She entered, clutching a small bag, her eyes wary upon seeing him. The air was heavy, as if both knew a boundary was about to break. Ethan stood, his voice calm but sharp. He asked about Caleb, the lawsuit, why she left school. Emma paled, her hand tightening on the bag's strap. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her tone laced with regret. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Then explain. I need to know, Emma, for Sophie." Emma turned away, tears glistening but not falling. She admitted Caleb was her brother, born with cerebral palsy. She had cared for him, studied to help him, but one night, He died suddenly. She offered no more, repeating only, "I can't." Ethan wanted to hold her, to ease the pain in her eyes, but doubt held him back. As a single-dad CEO, he couldn't risk Sophie's safety. "If you're not honest, I can't let you stay," he said, his voice hoarse. Emma looked at him, her eyes shattered, then turned away. "Then I'll go," she whispered, her voice heavy with pain, and left the mansion, leaving Ethan in a suffocating silence. The next morning, Sophie stopped eating. She sat before a bowl of soup, her eyes vacant, her hands still. Ethan knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Come on, sweetheart, just a little." But Sophie only clutched her dress as she had before meeting Emma. Ethan tried reading stories, singing lullabies, but nothing worked. His heart ached. Sophie wasn't just refusing food, she was retreating into the lonely world Emma had once drawn her out of. With a deep, searing pain, Ethan realized he needed Emma more than he'd thought. She wasn't just a caregiver, she was Sophie's light. And his. He called Emma, but she didn't answer. He went to the diner, but she wasn't scheduled. With each passing hour, his desperation grew. He thought of Sophie's smile, of how Emma had made him laugh genuinely for the first time in years. But the lawsuit, Caleb, and her secrets shook him. A millionaire dad, he always controlled everything. But now he was powerless against his own emotions. He opened his laptop, reviewing Emma's file. A new detail from Mark. The lawsuit wasn't just about Caleb, but also involved a doctor at NYU who vanished after the incident. Ethan frowned. What did this doctor have to do with Emma? Was the stranger at the diner part of this secret? That night, Ethan sat by Sophie as she slept, her breathing uneven. He held her hand, his heart heavy. He recalled Emma's eyes as she left, as if carrying the weight of the world. He wanted to trust her, but the truth about the lawsuit scared him. If she had erred with Caleb, was Sophie safe? Yet deep down, he knew Emma wasn't reckless. She had given her heart to Sophie, and to him. His dependence on her, both emotionally and rationally, left him rattled. As he prepared to stand, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Emma isn't who you think. Check St. Mary's Hospital." Ethan's heart pounded. St. Mary's, where Caleb died. Was this message a clue or a trap? He gripped his phone, his eyes fixed on the receipt with Emma's note. He knew he was nearing the truth, but each step made him fear losing her forever. Ethan Hayes sat huddled in the far corner of the old library at the edge of New York City, the dim yellowed light of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across the worn wooden table before him. The air carried the unmistakable perfume of antiquity. Musty volumes lined the shelves, their leather bindings cracked and frayed, their pages yellowed with the passage of time. Yet the world of these forgotten tomes felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the turmoil roiling within his mind. As a single dad millionaire, Ethan had faced boardroom battles that would have humbled lesser men, and he had weathered the unimaginable grief of losing his wife with a determined facade of strength. But now, Emma Reed's secret, and the devastating questions it raised, had driven him into a labyrinth of doubt from which there seemed no escape. He leaned forward, fingertips brushing the topmost file in the tidy stack that his assistant had delivered earlier that afternoon. The papers were thick with medical reports and legal pleadings, each sheet brimming with clinical jargon and cold accusations. With trembling hands, Ethan flicked through the pages, his pulse quickening as he came upon the dossier that chilled him to the bone. Caleb Lane, a 10-year-old boy, had died at St. Mary's Hospital because of a medical error. A dangerously high dose of medication prescribed in error, a fatal oversight that no one could explain away. The Lane family had sued the hospital, the attending physician, and even Emma Reed, who had been Caleb's primary caregiver. Ethan closed his eyes, his throat tightening at the thought. Emma, the woman he had come to trust, whose gentle voice had sung lullabies to his own daughter, whose bright smile had kindled something he believed lost forever, was accused of bearing responsibility for her brother's death. He pressed the edge of the file to his lips as if to taste the bitter truth, inhaling slowly. In his jacket pocket, a crumpled scrap of a hospital bill whispered its own reminder, Emma's handwriting scrawled across it in neat, looping letters. "Thank you for trusting me." It had once been a comfort, a token of hope. Now it echoed like a mocking refrain, and beneath the surface of his controlled composure, the question throbbed. Who was the woman he had fallen for? A wounded soul trying to atone for an unthinkable tragedy, or someone capable of mistakes too grievous to forgive? Ethan's gaze drifted away from the files and toward the dusty lamp, the dim light flickering as though in sympathy with his inner turmoil. He thought of Sophie, his daughter with down-turned lips and sad, distant eyes, who had grown more withdrawn since Emma's sudden disappearance. Sophie's disability made her world fragile. Emma had been a beacon of understanding and warmth, a rarity in the cold precision of doctors and therapists. Without Emma's bright presence to soothe her, Sophie's laughter had faded, replaced by silence that gnawed at Ethan's heart. He could not allow his daughter to wither under the shadow of this mystery. No matter how heavy the truth, he had to uncover it, for Sophie's sake and for his own. He swept the documents into a neat pile, closed the file with a decisive snap, and rose to his feet. The library's tall windows revealed a sliver of night sky, the first raindrops of an April storm tapping softly against the glass. As he turned to leave, the door creaked open and Emma stepped inside. Her thin coat was speckled with raindrops, her dark hair tangled at the nape of her neck. She looked at him, her face paling as she beheld the mound of legal papers on the table and the determined set of his jaw. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat, fragile with panic. Her eyes darted from the files to Ethan and back again, as though hoping it was all a mistake. Ethan lifted the file before him, the single gesture carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. "Caleb," he said steadily, "the lawsuit, medical malpractice. Emma, I need the truth." His voice was low, but every syllable resonated with urgency. Emma's breath hitched. She raised a trembling hand to her old silver bracelet, twisting it around her wrist as if it were an anchor. "Stop, Ethan," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm begging you. I can't lose anyone else." He took a step closer, the flickering lamp illuminating the despair etched across her face. His own heart ached at the sight of her vulnerability, but he could not let pity blind him. "Emma," he said softly, "I love you, but I love Sophie more. And she's hurting because of what I don't understand. Please, tell me what happened that night." Emma looked away, tears carving silent paths down her cheeks. The hush between them seemed to stretch into eternity before she found her voice cracking like dry wood. "Caleb was my little brother," she began. "He was everything to me, my best friend, my reason for studying special education. Whenever our parents were away, it was me who stayed by his side. I read to him, taught him games, sang him lullabies when fever kept him awake." Her words tumbled out in a rush, laden with grief. Ethan closed his eyes, willing him to see beyond the accusations to the sister's love that bound her to that boy. He could almost hear the memory of her sweet song drifting through his mind. "One night, he spiked such a high fever that I panicked," Emma went on. "I rushed him to St. Mary's, as I always did because I trusted them. But when he was admitted, the doctor gave him the wrong dosage of medication. I begged them to check, to make sure it was safe, but they said I was overthinking. They told me to go home. I left, full of dread, and an hour later, he was gone." Emma's shoulders slumped, and she pressed her hands to her face, her tears soaking into her coat. "Then I got the call. Caleb didn't make it. They blamed me for not stopping it. They sued me for failing to protect my own brother. I watched as the Lane family, blinded by grief, turned on me. I dropped out of NYU. I ran away. But the guilt, it followed me wherever I went." Ethan's breathing caught in his throat. He wanted to reach out and hold her, to say it wasn't her fault, but his role as Sophie's father, as a man of responsibility, held him back from impulsive consolation. Instead, his voice came out thick and low. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have done anything to help." Emma's red-rimmed eyes met his, haunted by a fear he recognized all too well. "Because you would see me the way they did," she said, her words trembling. "You would see me as broken, untrustworthy. I couldn't bear to look in your eyes and watch you lose faith in me." Ethan swallowed hard. He had to choose between trust and doubt. He reached out and took her hand in his, feeling the tremor beneath her skin. "Emma, I need you," he said, voice breaking. "Sophie needs you, more than anyone. I can't do this alone." Emma's fingers tightened for a heartbeat, then slipped away. She shook her head, the tears flowing freely now. "I can't hurt anyone else," she whispered. And before he could stop her, she turned and fled into the night, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Ethan stood frozen, the library door closing with a soft click behind her. Silence pressed in on him, as suffocating as the weight of his own regrets. He stared at the empty doorway, mind racing with doubts and fears he could not quell. Emma had pushed him away to protect him, but in doing so, she had placed Sophie's happiness on a knife's edge. The sky overhead rumbled with distant thunder as Ethan bundled the documents back onto the desk. He left the library in a daze, stepping out into the cool spring rain. The drive back to his estate on the outskirts of the city was a blur of streetlights and splashing puddles. His mind replayed Emma's confession, the tremor in her voice, the heartache in her eyes. He thought of Sophie, waiting at home, alone, believing Emma had abandoned her. No, sorry. He realized the cost of his inaction. Sophie's broken spirit would not heal in his arms alone. No sooner had he reached his driveway than his phone buzzed, a message from Caroline, the family butler, lighting up the screen in urgent red letters. Sophie is ill. Fever spiking. Won't eat. The ground fell out from under Ethan's feet. He dashed inside, dropping his wet coat and keys in the foyer before sprinting up the wide staircase 2 steps at a time. He burst into Sophie's nursery, warm, softly lit, with plush toys arranged neatly on the dresser, and found her sprawled across her small bed, blankets tangled halfway to the floor. Her face was flushed, streaked with sweat despite the open window. She lay motionless, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny in one hand, the other resting limply on the covers. Ethan's chest tightened. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her wrist, then her neck, feeling the rapid pulse. Sophie, he whispered, bending close. Sweetheart, it's Daddy. No response, just the raspy hitch of her breath as she turned toward the window. His throat constricted with panic. He pulled her into his arms, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. Please, wake up, he murmured, voice raw. He pressed his cheek to hers, smelling the sour tang of fever. Sophie's tiny body felt as weak as a bird's. Minutes later, the on-call pediatrician arrived, clipboard in hand, and announced that Sophie's fever was dangerously high. She needed rest, cold compresses, and IV fluids if it did not break soon. Ethan nodded absently, barely registering the doctor's instructions. He barely heard the beeping of the monitor or the rustle of nurses' scrubs as they checked vitals. All he could think of was how Sophie's sadness at Emma's absence had manifested in illness, how his attempts to protect her heart had instead left it more vulnerable. He knew that without Emma's gentle care, Sophie's spirit would continue to erode. That night, Ethan took the first watch by Sophie's bedside. The mansion's grand corridors lay silent, and every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a drumbeat in his chest. He sat in the bedside chair, notebook open in his lap, though he had not written a word. Instead, he stared at Sophie's fragile form, the rise and fall of her chest, remembering Emma's lullabies, soft melodies that had always drawn Sophie from her nightmares into a peaceful sleep. He closed his eyes and listened to the memory of Emma's voice, gentle, unwavering, filled with love. That voice had soothed his daughter's fears and, in some mysterious way, had begun to heal his own broken heart. But Emma was gone, and with her, that beacon of hope. The room felt colder without her. Ethan found himself wondering about the stranger in the diner, the man whose steely stare had unsettled Emma. Could he be connected to the lawsuit, or to Dr. Harris, the physician who had disappeared after Caleb's death? Questions plagued Ethan's mind like gnats in a closed room, each one stinging his resolve. He rose, pacing the length of the room, then returned to his laptop on the small side table. The cursor blinked on the screen. Incoming email from his assistant. A report titled Harris Memo Review. Ethan's fingers trembled as he clicked it open. The memo revealed that Dr. Jonathan Harris, the attending physician in Caleb's case, had once been a rising star at St. Mary's, renowned for his precision. Yet rumors whispered that he had been threatened, cornered by powerful figures within the hospital administration shortly after the lawsuit was filed. His sudden departure from the medical community had been unexplained, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and scandalized colleagues. Ethan's fingers hovered above the keyboard as he absorbed the implications. What was Emma's connection to Dr. Harris? Why had she fled when he simply wanted the truth? He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, fatigue and worry weighing heavy. But as he opened them again, the embers of determination glowed in his gaze. He would find Emma and Dr. Harris both, if it took every resource at his disposal. He typed a quick message to his assistant. Locate Dr. Harris. Verify his last known contacts. I want everything. By dawn, Sophie's fever had abated slightly, but she remained listless. Ethan watched as she opened her eyes, those big brown eyes, and stared at him with a distant, vacant look. He managed a weary smile, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Hey, my girl," he whispered. Sophie blinked once, then turned away, her little hand brushing at her pillow as though afraid to trust the world again. Ethan's heart twisted. He realized how much he had driven Emma away through suspicion, through fear of letting someone else close to his broken heart. He had all the power in the boardroom, all the influence in charity circles, but with Emma he had been powerless. He retrieved his phone and dialed her number again. It rang, unanswered. He dashed downstairs to the diner on the corner, replaying their last bitter argument in his head. The cook shook her head when he asked after Emma. She had called in sick. Each closed door pounded against his chest like a hammer. He returned home in defeat, uncertainty gnawing at him. He stood in the foyer, staring at his reflection in the marble surfaces. The night's events weighed on his shoulders like a physical burden. Just as he was about to retreat to his study to comb through documents again, the front door opened behind him. Ethan spun around to see a middle-aged woman in a tailored navy suit, her expression cool and unreadable. She carried a slim briefcase in one hand and regarded him with a measured gaze. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Ethan swallowed. "Yes. Who are you?" She offered a crisp business card. "Linda Carter. I represented the Lane family in the lawsuit concerning Caleb's death." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him. "If you wish to learn the full story of Emma Reed, you should examine the records at St. Mary's Hospital. But be warned, there are powerful interests that would rather see certain truths remain buried." Ethan felt a jolt of alarm. He took the card, his pulse quickening. "What truths?" he demanded, though his voice trembled with the weight of impending revelations. Linda didn't answer directly. Instead, she nodded once and turned on her heel, footsteps clicking away down the hallway. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, the business card burning in his palm as her final words echoed in his mind. "Be careful. There are those who don't want the truth exposed." He sank onto the nearest chair, head spinning. Emma's secret had always been a barrier between them. But now, beyond her pain over Caleb's death, there lay another mystery. The shadowy figures who would stop at nothing to keep Dr. Harris's disappearance and the hospital's culpability concealed. Ethan's mind churned with questions. Why had Emma fled instead of fighting back? What had she uncovered about the doctors and administrators at St. Mary's? Who was behind the threats that had driven the brilliant physician into hiding? He pressed the business card against his chest as though it were a lifeline. Despite everything, the doubts, the danger, the heartbreak, he knew one thing for certain. He would not abandon Emma Reed to face this dark maze alone. For Sophie's sake, and for the sake of the man he hoped to be, he would dive into the heart of this conspiracy, no matter the cost. Ethan closed his eyes briefly and drew a deep breath. Then he rose, resolve hardening like steel. He would start by returning to St. Mary's records, by questioning Dr. Harris's last colleagues, by tracing every lead until the light of truth shone on every hidden corner. And he would do it in time to bring Emma and Sophie back to safety, back to the love they all deserved. Because some secrets, no matter how painful, demanded to be told, and some truths, no matter how dangerous, were worth fighting for. Ethan Hayes' footsteps echoed down the deserted hallway of St. Mary's Hospital in New York, each footfall a testament to his mounting desperation. The night air inside the building was bone-chilling, filled with the steady hum of ventilators and monitors, a mechanical symphony that felt like the heartbeat of a world perpetually on the brink of crisis. As a single dad millionaire, Ethan had long believed himself capable of bending the universe to his will, negotiating seven-figure deals one moment, then meticulously managing his daughter's therapy appointments the next. But now, faced with Sophie's fragile condition, his beloved disabled little girl racked by fever and sorrow, he felt utterly powerless. In his jacket pocket burned two reminders of his failure and hope in equal measure. Linda Carter's business card, the attorney spearheading the lawsuit over Caleb's tragic death, and the crumpled fragment of a hospital bill scrawled in Emma Reed's handwriting with the words, "Thank you for trusting me." Emma Reed, the enigmatic woman who had swept into Sophie's life and, in doing so, had stirred something unexpected within Ethan's own bruised heart. She was the light that had banished Sophie's darkest fears, and yet she had become the axis around which a web of questions and dread now spun. Ethan knew he had to find Emma, both to rescue Sophie from the weight of her longing and to confront a truth that threatened to engulf them all. He paused outside Sophie's door, steeling himself before pushing it open. Inside, the overhead lamp cast a pale circle of illumination across his daughter's bed. Sophie lay curled beneath the sheets, her small frame shivering against the chill, her cheeks ghostly pale. Her eyes were closed, as though the world beyond her dreams had become too painful to endure. The doctor's earlier diagnosis, a fever born of physical exhaustion, rang hollow in Ethan's mind. He recognized the deeper cause, the ache of abandonment, the ache of losing Emma. Sophie's soul, fragile from her disability, had cracked and bled ever since the woman she adored had turned away. Silently, Ethan crept to the bedside and took Sophie's little hand in his. The warmth of her skin had once been his anchor. Now it felt more like a lifeline tenuously tethered to hope. He bent close, whispering her name, willing her to wake, to smile, to feel safe again. But Sophie remained motionless, her chest rising and falling in a slow, shallow rhythm. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. He placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, then drew back, his gaze drifting to the corner of the room where he had left his laptop open. He moved toward the desk and scanned the report his assistant had forwarded just minutes ago. It was a chronicle of Emma's clandestine generosity. For 2 straight years, she had anonymously transferred substantial sums to St. Mary's, covering the medical bills of dozens of pediatric patients whose families could not pay. Funds had arrived monthly, always on the first, always enough to keep machines whirring and vials flowing. Emma's name never appeared on hospital rosters, and yet her influence was etched into the lives of children she had never met. Ethan inhaled sharply, a painful mixture of admiration and sorrow tightening his chest. Emma was not merely fleeing a past she could not face. She was seeking redemption in the only way she knew how. He closed the report, his resolve sharpening into something fierce. He would not leave Sophie in this state of limbo. Emma had to be found. Ethan rose and strode from the room, determination set in every muscle. He pressed the speed dial for Emma's phone. It rang and rang, straight to voicemail. His heart pounded as he tapped out a terse text. "Emma, Sophie needs you. Please answer." No reply came. He raced down the corridor and out of the hospital, the night air slapping his face. The diner where Emma had been working last week was nearby. He sprinted there, only to find the neon sign flickering despite the late hour and no sign of her inside. The cook shrugged. She hadn't shown up for her shift. Ethan's frustration flared into alarm. He dialed a mutual friend's number, determined to exhaust every lead. Finally, a soft-spoken colleague admitted that Emma often slipped back to St. Mary's after dark, drifting through the pediatric ward with bags of toys in her arms. The toys were small, stuffed animals, a few hand-painted wooden puzzles, but in Emma's hands, they were talismans of comfort. His heart hammering, Ethan tore back to the hospital. He re-entered through the emergency doors, bypassed the nurse's station with a curt wave, and followed the dim glow of the children's wing. Each step felt like wading through quicksand. He imagined Sophie's hollow-eyed gaze, her trust wounded by every unanswered question. Rounding a bend, he caught sight of a lone figure in the corridor, her silhouette slender beneath a thin coat. In her arms, she cradled a well-worn teddy bear, its fur matted by countless late-night missions of mercy. "Emma!" he called, his voice echoing with relief and accusation all at once. Her head snapped up, her eyes widened, terror flickering in their depths. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling like a wounded bird. He took a cautious step forward, the hospital's antiseptic tang mingling with the frigid night and his own rising panic. "I know about Caleb," he said, his voice a rasp of controlled pain. "I know about the lawsuit, and I know what you've been doing for this hospital." Emma sank back against the wall, clutching the teddy bear to her chest as though it were both shield and confession. She exhaled a trembling breath and began to speak, her words breaking like fragile shards. "It was my fault," she murmured, tears blurring her vision. "I was there that night. I begged him to check the dosage again when Caleb's fever spiked. But the doctor, he wouldn't listen. He said I was overreacting. And then the next morning, Caleb was gone. His family. They blamed me. They sued me for not stopping it. They made me out to be a villain." Her voice cracked. She closed her eyes, and Ethan could hear her swallow back her anguish. "I dropped out of school. I ran." She looked at him, desperation flaring in her gaze. "But I couldn't live with the guilt. So I stayed here. I came back night after night, hoping I could somehow help others. For Caleb's sake, for every child who might be forgotten." Ethan stepped close, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did what you could," he murmured, emotion catching in his throat. "You aren't to blame for what that doctor did." But Emma's shoulders hunched, as if carrying the weight of her own condemnation. "You don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "The lawsuit isn't over. The Lane family, they won't forgive me, especially his uncle, Robert Lane. He's convinced I have to pay for Caleb's death." At that moment, a tall figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the corridor. Robert Lane, the stranger from the diner, his features sharp in the sterile light, his eyes cold as fractured glass. He crossed the distance with a predator's grace, and Emma's face went pale. "You think you can hide forever, Emma?" Robert's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Ethan instinctively moved between them, his protective instincts igniting. "Leave her alone," he demanded, tone icy. "Caleb's death." Robert cut him off with a sneer, flinging a manila folder onto the floor between them. The folder spilled its contents, medical reports, dosage logs, and margin notes in Emma's handwriting. "She knew the dosage was wrong," Robert spat, voice slick with accusation, "yet she did nothing to stop it." Emma's hand went to her mouth, her body trembling as though struck. Yet Ethan seized her hand in his own, making sure she would not collapse. He turned to face Robert, lips pressed into a hard line. "That's not the whole story," Ethan said, voice low but unwavering. He reached down and picked up one of the log sheets, scanning it until his eyes locked on a hidden notation. "Directive from admin. Override dosage." He looked up at Robert. "Who forced Dr. Harris to override the dosage, Robert? Who demanded the change?" Robert's face flickered with something like guilt or fear, but he masked it with anger. "That's internal hospital business," he growled. "This isn't about me covering my tracks. It's about Emma lying to protect herself." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You're protecting people who endangered Caleb's life," he shot back. "Let Emma go, or I'll make sure the world knows what really happened here." For a heartbeat, Robert's gaze wavered. Then he stiffened and nodded once, sharply. "Fine," he said, turning on his heel. Before he left, he spat. "You best be ready. You can't escape justice." And with that, he stalked away, his footsteps fading into the hush of the corridor. Emma slumped against Ethan's chest, tears spilling down her cheeks. She pressed her face into his jacket, as though seeking absolution. Ethan tightened his arms around her, his own eyes burned with emotion. "You're not at fault," he whispered. "You did everything you could for Caleb. I believe you." Emma lifted her head, searching his face. In that look, Ethan saw relief and fear wrestling with one another. They stood there for a long moment under the hospital's unforgiving lights, until Emma drew a shuddering breath and nodded. They returned to Sophie's room side by side, their bond strengthened by the confrontation. Inside, Sophie's breathing had steadied, her fever finally ebbing. Emma knelt beside the bed, placing the teddy bear gently at Sophie's side, and sang a soft lullaby. Sophie's eyelids fluttered open, and a faint smile curved her lips as she reached for Emma's hand. Ethan watched, his heart thawing at the sight. They spent the next hour reading stories aloud to Sophie, taking turns feeding her ice chips and water, and lighting a small table lamp so the hospital's harsh glare would not pain her eyes. With every shared glance, every shared task, handing Sophie a spoonful of soup, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead, Ethan felt a deeper certainty bloom within him. Emma was more than a caregiver to his child. She was the woman he wanted standing by his side through every trial, past, present, and future. That night, after Sophie had drifted back to sleep, exhausted but comforted, Emma settled into a chair near the window. She closed her eyes, and within minutes, soft murmurs rose from her lips, words half-formed, tinged with agitation. Ethan, seated at the desk, reviewing security footage for any sign of Robert Lane's return, froze at her whisper. "Dr. Harris, don't let them find out." His blood ran cold. Dr. Harris, the physician at the heart of the malpractice dispute, the man who had disappeared without a trace after Caleb's death. What secret did Emma hold about him? Who were they, she feared? Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he watched her sleeping form. He yearned to wake her, to demand clarity, but her face in repose betrayed such raw vulnerability. He reached across the desk and took her hand, his touch gentle. With a racing mind, he pulled out his phone and typed a single terse message to his assistant. "Locate Dr. Harris." by any means necessary. He pressed send, steeling himself for a journey far deeper into treacherous waters than he had ever imagined. Yet as he looked at Emma's sleeping silhouette and then across the room to Sophie's peaceful repose, he understood that no peril, no secret, would drive him from her side. Emma Reed was no longer merely a mysterious stranger haunting their lives. She was their future, their chance at healing, and the keeper of a dangerous truth he would protect at all costs. Ethan rose from his chair, slipping the phone into his pocket, and stood over Emma. He rested a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered, more to himself than to her, "No matter what lies ahead, I won't let you go." In the silent hospital night, his words hung between them like a vow, an unspoken promise that not even the darkest secrets could sunder their fragile, hard-won hope. And somewhere beyond the ward's closed doors, the ghosts of their past stirred, waiting for the next turn in a story neither of them could yet fully imagine. Dawn broke gently over Ethan Hayes' estate on the outskirts of New York. Soft golden light flooded the living room, dissolving the echoes of stormy days. As a single-dad CEO, Ethan once believed his life consisted only of multi-million-dollar deals and the grief of losing his wife. Now, Emma Reed and Sophie, his disabled daughter, had brought new meaning. Emma, the woman who had once been a mystery shrouded in suspicion, was now the light in this cold home. Yet her whispered words about Dr. Harris and the man behind it all drove Ethan to keep seeking the truth. He clenched the slip of paper bearing Emma's note, "Thank you for trusting me," and wondered if he was ready to face the final secret. Sophie, after days of illness, was stronger now, yet she remained quiet, her eyes distant. Ethan and Emma took turns caring for her, reading stories and singing lullabies, but Ethan's heart felt heavy. He knew the Lane family, especially Robert Lane, still threatened Emma, convinced she was responsible for her brother Caleb's death. He had instructed his assistant to dig deeper into Dr. Harris, the physician tied to the Caleb lawsuit, but each new clue only thickened the mystery. Although Emma stayed by his side, she maintained an invisible barrier, as if afraid the past would swallow their fragile happiness whole. One morning, as Emma fed Sophie a spoonful of soup, Ethan's assistant email alert chimed. The new documents revealed that Robert Lane was not just Caleb's uncle. He had once worked at St. Mary's Hospital and shared a personal connection with Dr. Harris. Ethan's brow furrowed, his pulse quickening. Robert wasn't merely enacting revenge for his grief. He was hiding something. He summoned Emma to his study, tension in his voice. "Robert Lane, what does he know about Harris?" Emma paled, fingers tightening around her old bracelet. She confessed that Robert had threatened her, warning she'd pay the price for revealing Harris's error to the Lane family. Yet she claimed no knowledge of Harris's whereabouts since his disappearance after the lawsuit. The air grew stifling. Ethan longed to shield Emma, but as a single-dad CEO, he needed absolute truth. He arranged a meeting with Robert at the estate, determined to end the threat once and for all. When Robert arrived, he entered with an icy stare and carried a worn dossier. "She destroyed my family," Robert hissed, pointing at Emma standing by Ethan. "She knew Harris was wrong, yet did nothing." Emma trembled, but Ethan gripped her hand, his voice unyielding. "Enough. Emma is not at fault. What are you hiding?" Robert sneered and slammed the dossier onto the desk. It was Dr. Harris's journal, detailing how he had been forced to prescribe the wrong medication by a hospital administrator, not Emma's failure. Robert admitted he knew the truth, but scapegoated Emma to protect the hospital's reputation, where he once worked. Rage flared within Ethan. He stepped forward, voice as cold as steel. "Leave, and never return. Emma is not your enemy." Robert recoiled, defeated, and departed the estate, leaving a painful yet liberating truth behind. Emma buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down. She revealed how she had blamed herself, believing that if she had acted faster, Caleb might still be alive. Ethan drew her into his arms, whispering, "It's not your fault. You did everything you could." For the first time, Emma let herself melt into his embrace, her warmth melding with his. They returned to Sophie, and as Emma sang her lullaby, Sophie managed a small smile and reached for Emma's hand. Ethan watched them, his heart swelling with a feeling he never thought he'd feel again: love. But the greatest secret still lay hidden. That evening, while tidying his study, Ethan discovered an old buy in a drawer, his late wife Anna's keepsake. Inside lay a handwritten letter addressed to an NYU student named Emma Reed. Ethan's breath caught as he unfolded it. Anna, who had funded scholarships for special education students, had chosen Emma for her talent and compassion. Her letter read, "You will bring light to the darkest corners. Yes, even to my own family." Ethan was stunned. His wife had already woven their lives together, as if fate had destined Emma to enter his and Sophie's world. He hurried to Sophie's room, where Emma was tucking in his daughter. With trembling hands, he handed Emma the letter. "Anna knew you. She believed in you." Emma read the note, tears falling as her fingers shook. She had never known Anna's identity. She assumed the scholarship came from an anonymous sponsor. In that moment, every barrier between them crumbled. Ethan dropped to one knee, taking her hand. "Emma, I need you not just for Sophie. I love you. Will you marry me?" Emma's breath caught, her eyes shining with joy and fear. She nodded and whispered, "Yes." At that instant, Sophie, sitting up in bed, picked up her spoon and, with a shaky hand, fed herself. Her first bite ever, but one brimming with meaning. Ethan and Emma exchanged tearful smiles. Sophie giggled, her laughter like silver bells, banishing the shadows of the past. They embraced, three at last, a true family, healing wounds to find love. The next day, Ethan and Emma took Sophie to the park, sunlight dancing across her bright face. They exchanged rings, not merely as a promise, but as a lifelong commitment. Ethan looked at Emma and knew she was not only Sophie's savior, but his own. Share this story with friends in America to spread the power of love, healing, and second chances. But as they left the park, Ethan found another unopened letter from Anna in the keepsake box. The final line stopped him cold. "Take care of them, Emma. I know you will find each other." Had Anna truly foreseen their destiny? Ethan squeezed Emma's hand, his heart full yet curious, deciding to keep this last secret for now, allowing the future to continue writing their story. Share this story with your friends in the U.S. to spread the emotion. Follow our channel, Millionaire Stories Best, to discover more dramatic love journeys.